Hello guys and welcome to my new video. So today I decided to have a look at Legion expansion. Basically, I've been seeing a lot of expectations and predictions for the new expansion coming out in BlizzCon, or the announcements that are going to be made and things like that, and it kind of made me reflect back on Legion and the concepts and the features that Blizzard introduced that I felt they were really good, some of the features that I felt were not so great. And these are all my personal opinions. They might not be exactly what you think about them, but I'll try to give my perspective of what made me come to the conclusion about these specific ideas that Blizzard implemented in World of Warcraft Legion expansion. Now, first of all, I want to cover the best concepts, and I feel that by far the best concept that has been introduced in Legion is the Mythic plus Dungeons. Mythic plus Dungeons is one of those things that allowed a lot of people, I mean probably majority of the population I want to say, to do something outside of raids. I felt that in previous expansions, a lot of negativity came from, or the people felt negative about the previous expansions, is that they would say like, after I finish my raid, there is really nothing to do. I'll go and storm and then I'll just like, you know, run laps around it and that's it. There was really no concrete content to do outside of raids, and even if you didn't raid, or even if you PvP, there's really nothing to do outside of those. And I feel that with Mythic plus Dungeons there's an additional component which I feel is growing and eventually could even overlap raids. I feel that this secondary content outlet could become really big, which is highly evident with the Mythic Dungeon Invitational. Mythic Dungeon Invitational I thought was really successful, and I feel it can actually become something like of an esport, the first ever PvE esport or something along those lines. But yeah, Mythic plus Dungeons, I felt, first of all, the class balance was relatively good in Mythic plus Dungeons. You can, if you have half an hour or whatever, you just log in, you'll try to do a Mythic Dungeon. The looking for group system is great for it. You can find a group pretty quick. There are some restrictions if you want to do really high Mythic plus Dungeons with item levels, Mythic plus scores and things like that, which might not be the most optimal, but it's there. It's there. So I feel that Mythic plus Dungeons is by far the number one thing that I enjoyed the most in this whole expansion. Besides that, I felt that there has been a relatively good class balance. If you look at Warlords of Draenor and things like that, especially from healer perspective, back in those days, this priest holy paladins were absolutely insane, beyond imagination. Like, I mean, they were the number one healers that you needed to bring. There was no question. If you're a Mythic guild, if you don't have these two healers, it would be way harder to beat bosses. The class balance was pretty lame, especially considering that this priest were in the beta of Warlords of Draenor were already OP, and Blizzard didn't change anything throughout the whole expansion, and they stayed OP for the whole expansion with no real change, even though there were forums filled with people complaining and things like that. They didn't change it. Which brings me to the next point. Relative class balance has been achieved due to the speed of content. The speed of content and the speed of class balance patches and things like that. There's been way more patches in Legion than I feel than any other expansion. I felt that in previous expansions Blizzard might have been really slow with some of the changes. Like, I mean, extremely slow with some of the changes. But right now I feel that it has improved massively. There's been class balance changes coming up way quicker. I feel Blizzard at most will pick out the classes that don't do that well, and they'll improve them. And you can see that even from the logs, and you can see from class logs for healers, DPS, whatever. There isn't a huge gap between each of the class. I know there's gaps between specs. Like, let's say there's a specific specs of rogues that might do really bad, then you're kind of pushed into playing one specific spec for rogue, which is subtlety right now. So, but at the same time, that spec for rogue will do really good compared to every other class. So of course, Blizzard cannot, or it's really hard to make each of the specs to be relatively good in PvE environment. But at the same time, they've done a good job to make class balance to be pretty good for healers, tanks, and DPS. At least it was way better than what it used to be. Like I said before, healers, disc priests and things like that was absolutely crazy. And another thing that I like to mention is a positive thing out of this expansion, which might shock a lot of people. You'll be shocked to hear it. I feel artifact power is relatively a decent inclusion. Hear me out. First of all, I think at the start of Legion, when artifact power came out, I felt it was too grindy. You were kind of forced into playing a specific spec. You're forced into playing. You play a specific spec. Let's say you're a healer. You can't really put any AP into balanced druid, so you can't play a balanced druid. If you go to an alt, you can't. Every time you play an alt and you get AP on your alt, you're like, oh, I should have gotten AP on my main, and now I'm behind. I'm gonna do crap damage, crap healings. It's game over. But I felt that artifact power progressively became better because the more time progressed, it was easier to grind. It's really not that hard right now to get decent artifact power levels. It really isn't on your alts and things like that. And the few levels between them, it's really not that big of a difference. Of course, there is difference with Netherlight Crucible. Netherlight Crucible not really going to cover. I don't feel it is the best concept for Netherlight Crucible. It's too RNG and things like that. I would put that as a negative. But I feel that artifact power, what artifact power brings is this. Every time you do, let's say, a raid or a Mythic Plus dungeon, and you get nothing out of it. Let's say you get there's no loot drops, nothing like that. You'll get AP. There's a little extra incentive there for you to do the dungeon. Let's say you wasted an hour on a really hard dungeon, and terrible loot drops. You had a terrible hour. It was sweating. It was just exhausting, and you're like, this was in previous expansions. You'll be like, this was just a complete waste of my time. Maybe I got some reputation for a specific faction or something. Like, there was absolutely zero incentive. Right now, you'll get at least something out of it. You get AP, and you'll be like, okay, my healer's got all the 75 AP levels already. I'll just put it into my off spec. It's something. It's something. It's like, it gives you, like, especially in an MMO game, having some kind of a progression like this encourages people to do a content, and at the same time, if you get nothing out of it, you'll get something. You'll get AP out of it. I feel it can be, artifact power system in itself can be changed a few ways, maybe made a little bit easier, but I still feel it is a concept that kind of pushes you to do content, and even if you don't get anything out of it, it's still something. And that's a good thing in my eyes. So let's look at the worst things that happened in this expansion. And probably for me, the number one thing that happened, one of the worst things that happened, is Legendaries. First of all, I thought Legendaries were really cool at the very start. Because they're so rare, it made it so special when you got one. But at the same time, if you got something terrible, it made it so much more worse. So in order to make it feel special, you have to make it rare. By making it rare, you're making people angry when they get a bad legendary. When they get a bad legendary and they start progressing raids, Mythic Plus, and when they do terrible DPS healing or whatever, they'll feel even more disappointed and more brought down by the whole concept of legendaries. But at the same time, if you increase the legendary drop rates, or if you make it like a token system where you can just pick whatever legendary you want, it won't feel special. It'll just feel just another piece of gear that you can get, that you can easily get, and it'll probably defeat the whole purpose of legendaries. I feel there's a lot of fundamental errors with legendaries that probably cannot be fixed. I think what could have made it a bit easier at the very start of the expansion, which apparently Blizzard did implement, but it was removed, was having some kind of a progression tracker for legendaries. Let's say your next legendary is going to come when you defeat 20 raid bosses or complete 50 Mythic Plus dungeons. And if you complete a Mythic Plus dungeon that's plus 10 or plus 15, you get 3 points instead of 1 point when you complete a dungeon that's lower item level. And every time you do a dungeon, you'll see a tracker on top of your screen saying, oh, okay, I'm getting closer, I'm getting there, it's gonna happen, it's gonna 100% happen in the next 10 dungeons. This kind of progression system will give you an idea of when you're going to get it, and it's going to kind of, a little bit at least, alleviate the problem of the RNG that Legion has become. Like I said, this would have helped an issue, but probably wouldn't have eliminated the complete issue. I don't know how they can fix legendaries. I mean, they could go back to what they used to have, making it super rare. Maybe not giving legendary to maybe giving 4 legendaries. 1 legendary for tanks, 1 for healers, 1 for melee DPS, 1 for range DPS, and making it relatively hard to get. So once the person gets a legendary, everyone else will be like, wow, that guy must be really good or whatever, or really lucky, and it'll be like, a really rarity. I don't know whether that will make it better or worse, but I really feel that legendaries right now really they're not making content fun, especially for alts. They're not making the content fun. Let's look at another aspect that I could probably talk for ages for, and it's a really split opinions about this. Titanforging. How do I feel about Titanforging? I get two of the perspectives here. First of all, I feel it's really stupid when someone from LF4 will get like 940 item level piece, which is probably going to be on 945, whatever. It's going to be equivalent to what like Mythical Jaden drops. First of all, someone who's doing LF4 should not get the same items as someone who's doing Mythical Jaden. I really don't feel like the difficulty difference there is insane. I really feel that should not be like this. But at the same time, I get the whole point of Titanforging. Titanforging was first implemented to actually give you a push towards doing a content that you overgear, or give you a push to do an older content. Because if you're doing older content, or let's say you're a heroic raider and you're doing normal Tumor Sargeras, you'll probably be pushed to do normal Tumor Sargeras because you'll be like, oh, something might Titanforge and it might be an upgrade, which is cool and nice. Or maybe you'll be pushed to do older content like Nighthold to get like tier sets. First of all, I feel there's fundamental errors with doing older content in the current content, because as a person who's raided Nighthold, I do not want to go back to Nighthold to actually try and farm tiers or try and farm trinkets that are insanely overpowered but has a chance to Titanforge. I don't feel it's a good concept. I feel that older content should stay older and basically be left there. But at the same time, I can see how doing normal Tumor Sargeras as a heroic raid and maybe getting something nice out of it. There's two opinions about this, and I know a lot of people. Some of them hate Titanforges, some of them like Titanforges. My idea is that Titanforge should not go beyond the difficulty level that you're currently doing. Normal should not Titanforge to heroic, heroic should not Titanforge to mythic. That's just me. That's my honest opinion about this. And a lot of people will tell me that, but hey MadSkillz, I'm trying to do a heroic Tumor Sargeras pug, and they're asking me for like 930 item level, even though it drops like 915 or whatever. That's a lot of that is to do with how Netherlight Crucible increased everyone's item levels, and how Titanforging has increased everyone's item levels, and how Argus became a really easy way to get gear through relinquished tokens. Relinquished tokens can Titanforge. So the reason why a lot of pugs require way higher item level gear to do the content that's below the item level gear is because Titanforging is part of the problem. So I don't feel that argument can be made against Titanforging or for Titanforging, because the whole demand and supply of high item level people in Tumor Sargeras is partly caused by Titanforging. But like I mentioned my opinions about this. I don't know how you feel about this. When I talk about Titanforging, I really don't cover Mythic Plus. Mythic Plus, I feel, is another level of Titanforging, because I feel anyone who does Mythic Plus, like let's say 20 or whatever, there should be a highly increased Titanforging system, or there should be a highly increased based loot, because anyone who does like plus 20s or like whatever, 19s, 18s, Mythic Plus, that kind of content most of the time will be harder like Mythic Goroth or something. It'll be way harder than doing something like Mythic Goroth, where in Mythic Goroth you have 20 people, and there can be a lot of people who screw up and you'll still get carried through. While in Mythic Plus content, where you have 5 people, someone dies in a plus 20 or whatever, you probably wipe and don't make the timer and whatever. So there's a lot there's a lot of bigger margin for error, but at the same time, it's easier to find 5 players than to find 20 players. So there's a big balance between the Mythic Plus and the raids and the Titanforging. But my opinion, Mythic Plus, high Mythic Plus should definitely have either increased Titanforging or increased base loot, or something along those lines. Because a lot of the people who are doing plus 20s, they probably won't get any piece of gear out of it, like at all. They're just doing it to look good on like rankings and things like that. That's the main reason, and there should be more incentive to do a really high Mythic Plus. Now, before the video goes super long, I want to cover the few other things that I feel that are not probably the best things that came out of Legion. I feel that items, I'm gonna say this, I feel that the trinkets were terrible in the whole of Legion, especially coming from Warlords of Draenor, where there were some insane trinkets that felt almost as good as tiers. felt almost as good as Tears, and they were so cool to get. But at the same time, if you don't have it, your DPS healing was pretty down. But they're almost like legendaries, the trinkets back in the day. But now, I feel anytime that a stat stick is your biz trinket, the game has failed in some way. Anytime that something so bland, something so relevant, and something so unfun can be your best trinket, I think it defeats the whole purpose of trinkets. Trinkets have always been a piece of gear that's one of the most interesting things to get, because they had these cool special effects. And now, Blizzard has removed those special effects, or at least put in special effects that are kind of crap, and Stat 6 became way, way better. Now let's hope Antorus is going to be different, and Legion is going to redeem itself in the whole trinket department, but right now, I feel the trinkets and effects and all that has been super, super boring. Now, before the video finishes, I wanted to cover the good and the bad things that I feel. It's a mixture. It's a mixture because raids and raid mechanics. I feel that Emerald Nightmare, Nighthold, and to some extent Tomb of Sargeras have been pretty nicely designed fights. They had pretty nice bosses and things like that. But at the same time, I feel that specifically Tomb of Sargeras, first of all, I feel Tomb of Sargeras Heroic was pretty good difficulty. The bosses had decent mechanics and things like that. But I feel Tomb of Sargeras Mythic was way, way, way overtuned. I feel the bosses like Mistress Sajin, Mythic Avatar, and Mythic Kil'jaeden were way overtuned. I feel that even after the change, I feel they were only doable by majority of the Mythic guilds after the massive amount of nerfs came out. And that's all. That all blame is coming towards the guilds like Method and Exorsus, who are just too damn good. And Blizzard is making the content close to impossible, basically. It was literally close to impossible to do because they didn't want the content to be beaten this quickly, which kind of made, for every other guild who might not have the time or skill or whatever, to basically make it nearly impossible to do. So I feel Tomb of Sargeras was one of the hardest raids ever, the Mythic-wise. Avatar and Kil'jaeden, Mistress Sajin to some extent, Maidens was so unforgiving and things like that. It was overtuned, and let's see how Antorus is gonna go. But let me know how you feel about this pretty long video. Let me know how you feel about all these concepts. Let me know how you feel about the best things that you felt Legion brought to you, and the worst things that it brought out as well. Let me know how you feel about this video. Make sure to like, subscribe, and all of that stuff. It really, really helps out the channel. And I'll see you in my next little guide.